Hello, I'd like to welcome everyone to the RCR Wireless Mobile Cloud Editorial webinar. My name is Roberta Prescott. I'm the Editor-in-Chief for Global Enterprise and Wireless Latin America channels. I'm Brazilian and I'm based in São Paulo. Today I will be joined in this webinar by Mike Sapien, Brian Kracik, and Eric Troyer. The plan for today is 1 hour webinar with about 15 minutes of questions and answers. In addition to this webinar, we are releasing a future report about mobile cloud. It is an in-depth story and it's available at our website rcrwireless.com. RCR Wireless has been covering mobile space for more than 30 years and has historic on encouraging the wireless ecosystems. As I mentioned earlier, I'm joined on today's call by industry observers. Mike, would you like to introduce yourself and give us some background?
Sure, Roberta. Let me just start with and just share with you that basically I work for Ovum, which is a global research firm. We have analysts across the globe and cover both telecom and IT services. And I've been with the company for over 4 years now and have over 26 years in the telecom industry and involved in many new services, new products, and covered trends across the gamut of all enterprise services. Thank you, Roberta.
Thank you, Mike. Brian, would you like to introduce yourself and give us also your background? Brian?
Roberta, looks like Brian's maybe unable to hear us or we can't hear him. So let me just review Brian Kracik's background. He's from Oracle. He's a director of product marketing at Oracle Communications, and he has been very focused on both systems and IT as well as telecommunications. He's got more than 21 years of experience. He also has recently been working very closely with service providers, which relates to both wireline, wireless, and applications, particularly mobile applications, as well as working with many of the large U.S. Mobile carriers here.
Thank you. And for today's webinar, we have Equinix as a sponsor, and I would like to introduce Eric Troyer. Eric, could you introduce yourself and give us some background?
Sure. Thanks, Roberta. My name is Eric Troyer, and my background is really around trying to figure out how to unload significant amounts of data to destinations. I've done it before for cable companies. I've done it for a pan-European network provider in terms of building out IP backbones and network infrastructure that's able to scale with user needs. So from an engineering background, having been a customer of Equinix several times using their facilities for that very purpose of interconnecting, I've been with the company about 8 years now, and my focus these days is on the mobility space, where Equinix is quite literally the junction point between where network operators meet one another, where cloud meets the network as a means of getting an on-ramp to end users. And effectively what Equinix does is we provide an interconnection platform for all these various companies in digital ecosystems that need to work with one another. If you imagine the digital supply chain of cloud and mobility, wireline access, advertising, social networking, social media, all of these elements require excellent connectivity to reduce latency and scale their services out. And Equinix does this by means of over 90 data centers in 30 countries across the globe. And the real emphasis here, again, is on reducing latency and scaling bandwidth. And our customer profile globally, we have over 900 different network operators who use our facilities for interconnection, as well as over 900 different cloud and IT services providers. Within mobility today, we host 4 out of the 5 top smartphone platforms, as as well as 4 out of the top 5 mobile OEMs. So today, more than ever, the data center is becoming a mobility enablement center, and I'm grateful for your time today to be on this call.
Thank you, Eric. So I'd like to move on today's webinar, and today's agenda we are discussing how mobile cloud can be the next step of cloud computing. We are going through this discussing about a scenario, what's going on mobile cloud, which are drivers, what challenges are, and also opportunities for carriers. For questions and answers, you are able to submit your question, use our webinar platform. Feel free to submit your question whenever you want, and we will return to it at the end of this webinar. So for commenting the scenario for mobile cloud, I will request Mike if you could give us some background on this and telling our audience what's going on mobile cloud today.
Sure, thank you, Roberta. So let me start with just a few things here. We're going to go fairly quickly over some of the many things that are happening in the current environment. So we have both end users demanding mobile access. We have also the growth of devices. In days past, having 1 or 2 devices was pretty much the norm. What we're seeing now at Ovum through research and talking to customers and vendors alike, that now we're seeing end users having 3 to 4 devices, which is creating a lot of demand, obviously, on applications and resources. Secondly, this impacts the service providers, operators, and other content providers as well of being able to provide these services. So that demand, and obviously things like smartphones and tablets being added to PCs and normal access, has created a much larger demand overall, as well as different interfaces and UIs that have to be created to actually be accessed by a mobile device versus a fixed PC or traditional device. Next slide, please, Roberta. So we have this kind of trifecta of the 3 different things that are really driving some of this. Beyond just the idea of access and the number of mobile devices, we now have other trends of technology in the industry, which the 3 I've characterized here at the top are cloud, mobile, and social. So I've already kind of hit mobile in the sense that people are now roaming, moving, traveling, knowledge workers who are out of their office, in some cases employees that have no office or are working from home. And so that is something that's obviously being impactful. Secondly, we have this idea of the cloud infrastructure, which relates to both cloud-based services as well as the infrastructure behind cloud-based services. And I will mention the last thing around basically having this idea that you want to have access and information available from any location. So you have this idea of any place, any device, and from any location that you're at to get access to information or applications, which is basically overall driving this. And I have this one quote here talking about, after 2020 it will be post-Silicon era with quantum computing. I actually heard some of this speech before and seen him speak. And the bottom line is this idea of having access everywhere and nowhere at the same time is kind of an interesting concept. But the idea is you will have to have this ability, and it's putting pressure on the vendors and the providers who have to provide these services. Next slide, please. Here is kind of a summary of that that's looking at a little more detailed level now, taking a look at the different things that are happening. What are consumers looking for? And you have anything here from the music streaming, video streaming, social networking, various cloud apps, web browsing, content downloading, and many of these obviously are overlapping. But it is also very much, again, multiple applications, multiple content, multimedia, and the thing that's not here that we need to think about too is the idea of multitasking. So we now have multiple people at many locations with multiple devices doing many things. And I think it's important to think about that as you see the demands coming across. From the technology perspective, let me take a little time and review some of the mobile computing platform that's happening. You have this idea of multiple wireless connection types, and I think, quite honestly, one of the things that I see driving that along the traditional, let's say, wireline and cellular wireless is you also have Wi-Fi that's come into play. Now, many people would believe that Wi-Fi was going to go away, but the fact of the matter is, at this point in time, we see Wi-Fi as a very viable option, a popular option to complement the wireline fixed environment as well as the cellular wireless model. And then you add in the devices that are now more capable, and you can see through this whole thing that you not only have the capability of the device, the hardware, the OS, the application, application stores, multimedia, but you have this idea of things like navigation, and I want to highlight navigation because that's something that takes advantage of many of these different applications and resources, as well as one of those trends where you do need multiple applications feeding into something as simple as just navigation. Go ahead, next slide, please. Now, here's a concept I want to share with you. I actually use this for some of the reports I've done around data centers and the ecosystem that normally is in data centers. As Eric would probably say, you know, this is what Equinix refers to as the marketplace. And inside Equinix, like many other large data centers, you see a multitude of people inside these kind of data centers. And inside, you almost see this ecosystem of vendors and connections and networks. And that's basically what a lot of this is actually talking about, is that you are seeing multiple service providers, multiple networks, multiple resources, multiple servers, multiple content providers, all inside a data center that now have to be there to provide service hubs to many of the providers. Now, 2 points I want to make here very quickly is, one is this used to be confined to just fixed network and some of your wireline services and basic things that are hosted inside a data center. What's happening now, twofold, is one, people are looking at this in a global perspective, so now you're having global providers, global applications, mobile applications inside the data centers that are putting a little bit more strain and stress on the infrastructure, as well as it's adding to many of the different players inside the network. So this ecosystem, our marketplace, is actually becoming a little more complex with mobility combined with the growth across global networks and global applications, again, putting more stress on this whole ecosystem of the data center. And now, Roberta, I think I hand it off to you for talking about some of the drivers.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So when I was writing this report, and I have to come up with some drivers to this mobile cloud, and I interview people, I come up with BIOD, the increase of the numbers of mobile subscribers, and also mobile device becoming smarter and friendly. And here in this slide from Informa, we can see how mobile subscribers are increasing. So in your, Brian, in your point of view, what could you point out as main drivers to the mobile cloud, and what do you think is boosting this new demand for this kind of cloud computing? Brian, can you hear us? If we don't get Brian at the time, Eric, could you comment on that?
Yes, this is Eric. Absolutely. Clearly, as we've seen in the projected path forward, and certainly by today's standards, the rolling out of things like LTE basically means an all-IP network. It means that the wireless experience starts to look more like the wireline experience. And cloud service providers learned a valuable lesson over the course of the years as they've deployed their infrastructure. And that is that for cloud adoption to truly take off, cloud must perform as if an application is installed locally, or there's a local instance of that application sitting right in front of the user. So again, latency being a key component of that, we see that with LTE, and the move to an all IP network, and the fact that inherently speaking, LTE as a protocol has less latency within the radio network in the packet core, that certain types of cloud services are far more viable. And backing up what you had mentioned before from a BYOD standpoint, the proliferation of these devices into the hands of enterprise users out in the field, out in the real world, interacting with customers, supply chains, in segments of their business, what we see is a ripe condition for the convergence of where enterprise cloud adoption for means of facilitating their mobile and remote work staff. And let's face it, you know, the work day is far beyond 9 to 5 any longer. More and more workers are bringing work home with them, and that's what these devices enable. Cloud is a significant way of assuring those applications are available to those users and consequently secure, because when you have a cloud-hosted environment, what you're doing is effectively drawing the moat around your application. If you envision the cloud application as being a castle, and you want to protect that castle, you put a moat around that, as opposed to putting firewalls in place all around your mobile workforce, which is significantly much more difficult to do. So it provides less attack vectors, if you look at it that way. So that is one aspect of what's helping drive that for mobility.
Hey, Roberta, this is Mike. If I may add just a couple of comments. I'd like to just, again, kind of hit the point about this idea of the end device and the subscribers. Traditionally, most mobile operators have looked upon, you know, one device, one subscriber, one service plan. I think two things that are driving this to a higher level. One is the idea that the subscriber is no longer one person and one device. So I mentioned earlier about most people now having 3 or 4 devices, but then you have this idea of people having family plans, and now it could be 3 people with 3 devices, and now you have 9 end devices talking on one plan or one subscription. So the idea of a subscription being one person and one plan and one device has clearly gone away. Second, we need to think about things that are not going to be a person. So I'm thinking about things in the M2M world where you may have thousands of devices. They could be packages, they could be vending machines, they could be appliances eventually, but thousands of devices that are basically not human operated, having to talk, speak, and talk to resources inside the network. So I see kind of a multiple dimension to explosion and growth here of both the traditional subscriber model being radically different and the actual end device being a non-human controlled device that's going to be sending data information over this network that's going to drive some of this demand.
Good. So we can also say the machine-to-machine, the increase of machine-to-machine can also contribute to boost mobile cloud?
Yes, definitely.
Good.
Yeah,
and,
now, this is Eric. To comment on telematics, that really was kind of a cloud before cloud was ever cloud type of application. Essentially, given the number of devices out in the real world that need to communicate real-time statistics back to centralized yet distributed locations, telematics has even the potential for interfacing with other cloud services, which I think is also one of the other key ideas we have to keep in mind in considering cloud enablement. There are many cloud applications that require communications with one another. So API calls between instances of clouds is certainly something we're seeing on the rise.
And I also tend to believe that some consumer and employees' behavior could also contribute to the mobile cloud. What I mean by that is, for example, if in the past the employees would wait to reach some documents or to access some information, nowadays what I observe is that executives, it may start with C-level, but nowadays with all employees, they want to access their data, information, and quickly and wherever they are, using many kinds of device, and which is a challenge for enterprise, right? And also, this lead us to the challenge that, as I was talking about. Mike, in your opinion, what are the main challenges? I point out here mobile internet, broadband. Of course, I'm in Brazil. I know mobile internet can be an issue here, but I also heard some people talking about the US, Canada, and even some European countries that might have problems with reaching internet broadband. What do you think?
Well, I think there's a couple of things here. You've hit a few high points of some of the challenges overall. I mentioned earlier a little bit about enterprise Wi-Fi. And again, it almost, like I said, there was a time people thought that Wi-Fi itself wasn't going to be all that necessary or be shrinking in coverage or demand. In fact, quite the opposite's happened. But with broadband itself and mobile broadband, I think what you're seeing is an explosion of the need for coverage both in, let's say, the large-scale macro level of country coverage, as well as in the micro level of things like in-building coverage. People and users, all of us, are expecting coverage wherever we are. Well, that puts a huge demand at the country level and the city level where service is available, but it also puts a demand in this kind of, I'll call it inside the office in the building, which is generating this demand for the whole smart, I'll say the femtocell, microcell environment where people are looking for coverage everywhere and anywhere they are, including weaving in and integrating Wi-Fi as one of those solutions, as well as obviously your traditional mobile data service. As it relates to employees and enterprises, this whole idea of access to corporate resources, part of it's BYOD, part of it's device management, part of it turns into this whole idea of privacy and governance. What do you owe your employees as it relates to access? What should they be paying for from the company perspective? What do employees expect to pay for? What kind of separation do they want between work and play? As Eric had mentioned earlier, many of us are working weird, strange, off hours, off shift hours. It's no longer an 8 to 5 world, and it's no longer I work only in my office world. So you have compliance issues, you have policy issues. Enterprises and IT staffs are struggling with how to manage that, how to govern that, and how to create new policies around it. And then we mentioned earlier about things like cloud computing. I would say cloud computing is inherently a different consumption model that drives IT resources to be structured differently, consumed differently, and then obviously paid for differently. But the bottom line is you now have mobility making demands on cloud computing that says it has to be available all the time, real time. And Eric kind of alluded to it, this idea I mentioned earlier about a traditional mobile user being a one person, one device, and one plan also had an idea that you basically had someone who turned it off and on, someone who used the network infrequently, someone who used resources infrequently. But when you get to the point where these devices, A, are no longer people, B, they're connected all the time, and C, as Eric mentioned, they're real time. This means they have to have that network available all the time, wherever they are, 7 by 24, which means downtime is critical. It means uptime is very important. It also means the demands on the infrastructure behind that service has to be there whenever that application or device is asking for resources. Lastly, I would say that there's a point here you have around the smart devices. I again want to reiterate, it's a matter of smart devices with or without a human behind them, as well as a multitude of devices versus, again, the singular one user, one employee, one device. So all that combined, or at least some of the basic challenges around how to manage the idea of a mobile access to resources that is putting pressure and creating the demand that's causing the need for some of these many new advanced mobile services access from anywhere in the globe and at any time.
Thank you, Mike. So it seems that we have Brian back. Is that right, Brian?
Yeah, I think so, Roberta. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's good. Great. So, Brian, I would like to ask you if you want to comment on drivers and challenge. I know we go through the mobile cloud scenario, but we also discuss a little bit of drivers and challenge and how they are tied together. So I would love you to add some comments on these topics as well.
Yes, I think what's interesting to me is when we look across the marketplace right now and we see what operators are doing from a cloud perspective and mobile cloud perspective, I look at it from their point of view. And we're seeing operators take advantage of cloud in really three different ways. One is they're looking to cloud internally as an IT organization to gain more efficiencies, right? Just to gain more efficiencies, period. Cleaning up their data centers and preparing them, not only taking those learnings and getting a lower cost of ownership internal to themselves, but also taking those learnings and starting to create offers out to their marketplace, to their enterprise customers, and to their consumers. So that's an internal view. Another view is what are they doing with cloud in the network? So how are they creating network as a service? How are they looking at doing software and developing software-defined networks? And what does that look like from a mobile perspective? As we talked about here, there's multiple devices, there's a lot of bandwidth consumption, and the need to provide that bandwidth, we're seeing operators drive to LTE, and we're then starting to see a huge multi-billion-dollar investment in just the RAN portion and the switching and so on and so forth. So we're looking to cloudify the network, if you will, okay? So that's a second area that they're looking to take advantage of cloud and provide that. A third area
No,
that
Brian,
we see.
I was just.
Go ahead.
No,
Go ahead,
I was
Roberta.
just getting. Yeah, no, sorry for interrupting. No, I was just getting into a point that you and Mike and Eric just point out about LTE. Do you think LTE could increase mobile cloud in a way that the previous 3G networks did not allow mobile cloud to grow, or it is something that would that mobile cloud would grow it naturally?
I think bandwidth is a key to allowing mobile cloud to grow. Think of the things that we can do from a mobile device and a tablet, a phone, a smartphone that we couldn't do in years gone past, right? It had to be a wired connection. Because we have this increased bandwidth, we can now start to open up other avenues to access different applications in the cloud, different services that come from the cloud. The way that I wake up in the morning, what do? I check my email, I check my calendar, I send a couple IMs, and it's just the way I communicate. I get to the office, which happens to be just in my home office. I'm leveraging Wi-Fi. I'm leveraging my mobility and moving throughout the interior of my house, extending that out to a coffee shop or what have you. My virtual desktop comes with me. The access to that virtual desktop is supplemented and made possible because of that wireless bandwidth. So it's a huge boost to creating mobile cloud. I don't know if anybody else wants to comment in that area, but that's really what we're seeing in the marketplace.
Great, thank you. And regarding challenges, I know I was interrupting you, and you said the first, the second, and you were just about to comment the third one. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So the third one really, it's really around believability. So what will you consume from a CSP through the cloud or in the cloud? What will you buy from them? You have over-the-top providers. Should they compete with them or embrace them? Are they going to develop a new community? So this is a challenge that they have to think of. So how do they interact with new cloud providers that are popping up all the time? When I see a new cloud provider, you have to remember that enterprises themselves are shifting from physical goods to delivery of digital goods through the cloud. Think of Cisco WebEx, for instance. Think of an Intuit. and how they deliver their software through the cloud. Gaming companies as well. Any types of media stores, Netflix, and downloading movies to mobile devices or desktops or laptops or direct into PlayStations or TVs. These are all challenges that they need to think about, is what will an enterprise buy from me and what will a consumer buy from me? Because just because you can put it in the cloud doesn't mean that you're a believable and respected provider of that service. So one of the areas that we've really seen take off is for CSPs is centered around providing cloud services that are really around communications. So email, calendaring, IM, other types of messaging, right? It becomes an extension of how you've bought from CSPs in the past, and they're finding a lot of success there in developing and delivering their own brand through a cloud service and helping extend that. We don't believe that you're going to have a CSP offer enterprise applications such as even a broader Oracle with an ERP system or some of the other ERP providers, an SAP application. That's not going to be their sweet spot. But in combining the communications capabilities and the bandwidth and the pipe and a quality of service guarantee with those kinds of services and applications, we believe they'll find success. So that's embracing the over-the-top for enterprise and consumer.
And this is Eric, just to kind of back into what Brian said there as well and identify that trend. We certainly see that taking place today with the number of over-the-top type players that are specifically purposed with things like contact backup, even things like IP multimedia subsystem, where there's differentiation between SIP-based communications for messaging services. A number of these deployments are being rolled out in a multi-tenant environment to hit essentially as many networks as possible, because the idea behind that model is, let's sell this service that we've developed, and let's make sure that as we're deploying this service, we're able to meet as many networks as possible. So that looks over the top in that aspect because it's approaching from outside the network while being connected to the network operator, but it's really considered someone part of their supply chain. So in telematics, an example would be someone like a Jasper Wireless, who's providing telematics service outsourced to network operators. Or if you were looking at something like the transcoding of content, or as I mentioned before, contact backup, a number of different service enablers who historically have been in the game around roaming, interoperation, and messaging are moving up the service stack to provide these value-added services. And certainly the believability component of it, we've seen recent announcements where certain network operators are getting rid of their own app stores. I think that's an evidence of the idea of that believability, that there is an over-the-top community that has done a very good job at creating services, both in cloud and applications. Consumers have voted with their dollars in some cases, and that finding that relationship not only financially, how do they do business together, but also the interconnection of those services so they can scale together is very important. And that's where the move to LTE and an all-IP architecture actually starts to look more like the wireline internet did 14 years ago and scaling into the way that it is today.
And Roberta, let me add to that, because it brings up a couple points I want to make on the LTE comments previously. Both Brian and actually Eric just touched upon it. I think what we're seeing as well on the network side, specifically, I'm going to focus on LTE now, because I think LTE, again, is going to be an enabler of both access by mobile devices as well as a proliferation of applications that are going to need some cloud-based infrastructure behind it. And I'll use, again, Eric's example of telematics. I believe with LTE being more available, it being more prevalent, it having increased coverage, the fact that there's more of an IP-based technology or enables IP-based technology is something that you'll see more of this grow faster and faster. And I think, as it turns out, the U.S. will be kind of the incubation lab for new applications with the LTE networks that will be available here, and quite honestly, multiple LTE networks, which will drive innovation and people and developers thinking about new ways to use the network, with now a mobile network, LTE, that is both standard, global, and IP-based support. So I think the aspect of LTE almost being a common mobile access platform with the IP nature of LTE and the higher bandwidth, we will see a lot more applications and more mobility options for applications that will drive the infrastructure behind the cloud and mobile networks that we see today. I think it's critically important to know that this will be the place, I believe, first. It won't be the only place, but it will be probably the primary markets where you have multiple LTE networks competing. You'll have developers, device, and software manufacturers fighting for business that will drive many new applications and growth overall.
And Roberta, I think this leads us into the slide you have up right now. And in my view, it looks as if when we see cloud-based applications being combined with network services, this is a challenge as well as an opportunity for service providers. They are fairly believable, and they can compete with things like infrastructure as a service or DB as a service as an add-on, or they could partner to get those things. You look at Amazon EC2 and the very commoditized way in which they deliver infrastructure as a service. It may be a business they decide they can't make money at, but what they can do is learn how to package their capabilities, core capabilities, with that cloud service, with a Dropbox on a consumer side for DB as a service, create that mobility in a package so they can add their collaboration environment and a unified communication suite combined with a DB as a service or an infrastructure as a service and create that bundled offering. Now they could do that internally or, again, partner to do it. If they do it internally, it brings up both a challenge and an opportunity. The opportunity is to attack SMB with that golden package, if you will, right? So infrastructure, start from zero, grow to whatever level you need it to. Storage the same way. Maybe they provide security, a VPN service, and they provide 25 to 50 mobile devices. That becomes their bundled offering to that SMB. It's a way to get that innovation and that drive going. And there can be a higher level package to more established enterprises with perhaps a guaranteed quality of service. And then how they handle the activation of those services and that service bundle internally is generally challenging. So it's how do you handle short-acting versus long-acting orders, right? So if I'm going to spin up a VM and create infrastructure as a service, that's a very quick action. And I want to start billing for that right away. If it's on the same service order, the same bundle as 20 mobile devices, and the company only activates 10 of those, when do I start billing for that? What kind of, how does my billing system handle it? How do I handle the order orchestration of that? And that's a critical area for operators to think about. It's the full kind of service order activation and cloud enablement stack that we see from a business management layer, a service management layer, and a resource management layer that becomes fairly critical.
And going back to your point, Brian, interestingly, about things like Amazon and commodity services, irrespective of an operator creating their own commodity service, connectivity to something like Amazon is extraordinarily important for obvious reasons, like things, e-commerce, particularly as we're in this holiday season. More and more, you're seeing people buying over mobile handsets on the go, even when they're in the house. But because of that, that commodity cycles and CPU capability, many new mobile applications bootstrap in that cloud environment. many of the hot consumer applications that have that quick uptake of users and then either sometimes get acquired or end up building out their own bare metal infrastructure start out in a lot of cases with Amazon. So operators also need to consider that within this ecosystem, the interconnection options necessary to facilitate a very good connectivity state for their end users to make sure that they're happy, because ultimately, they have end users that are paying subscriptions today that expect good connectivity, and the operators will need to oblige them on that.
Great point.
So do you,
so Roberta,
just
hand it back over to you.
Do you believe, do you believe in this scenario we see enterprise, consumers, but carriers are in the center of all this? Are they prepared for attending mobile cloud needs, and would they have to change or to have another business model in order to provide some mobile cloud offering, for example?
So Roberta, from what I'm seeing, there is a retooling organizationally that needs to take place. A lot of the operators have started with perhaps a managed service perspective and then evolved into a mobile cloud perspective and just a cloud perspective in general. And they've had to retool their organization to reflect that. Pure play mobile operators generally are staffed to sell rate plans and connectivity. And so hiring a skill set, if they're moving into more of a solution selling environment, is very critical for them. And understanding specifically who their target buyer is and how they want to present that out. So we spend a lot of time up front with the operators trying to figure out exactly who is their target market and what are they trying to sell them and what pains are they trying to solve. And then helping them understand organizationally how they need to adjust in order to have success in that marketplace.
If I can add, Brian, this is Mike again, because it kind of follows on to your thinking and what I know that you've been involved in and done recently with some of these carriers. And I'll just probably use for this example, I'll use AT&T as an example. I think the three things I think about that's radically changed, this retooling that Brian refers to, one of them is the idea of how they bill. The idea, again, of the one user, one device, one service plan, and some monthly rate you pay. They subsidize the phone, typically some, obviously mobile device that's used primarily for voice and data with one user, and that was the traditional model for actually many years. Well, that model had to change, and I'd say one of the breakthrough areas was really around M2M, where the operators, including AT&T, realized they couldn't charge that way. So change in the business model is important about how they bill. The second, I think, is around the idea of applications and how they manage applications mobily and otherwise. But in this case, let's look at the mobile network and how applications get developed. Well, again, AT&T has had a plan called Dev Connect, which is basically a developer's program. And I'd say years ago, it was pretty simple. But today, it's a more open environment, which says that any third party could come in and develop something that could lay on top of AT&T's network. Well, that is an ideal precursor to the cloud mobile environment of today. And thirdly, I'll get into this idea of partnering. I think the telcos, including AT&T, Verizon, and others, had originally, I think, thought as a wireline and wireless operator, let's say mobile operator for now, they had to basically invent, create, market, sell, and go to market all on their own and be the brand in front. I think they've all decided and changed their attitude and model, which again relates back to Brian's comment about retooling. They do not have to own every application. They cannot own every application. They don't have to be the only go-to-market partner or channel for it. That has changed, and I think that has opened up both technically and from a go-to-market perspective that other companies, third parties, can now market applications and services on top of the mobile network. Those are three of the high-level changes I see that's part of the retooling that Brian has talked about.
Thank you, Mike. So we go here for our question and answer. We've passed it through, we've discussed the most important topics related to mobile cloud. So if you did not submit your question, please do now. I have some questions here and I will ask. So the first one is how easy is it for a smartphone application software company to migrate its products from premise-based to cloud? Who would like to answer this?
Yeah, so Roberta, can you repeat that? So I think the question is, how easy is it for a smartphone application provider or just any
Software
application to go?
No, as I understood, is a software company to migrate its products from premise-based to cloud.
Yes. So this is an interesting question, and it's one that at Oracle we're actually attacking as our own. So as you might understand, we have an Oracle public cloud, and this is how we're taking our enterprise-based applications and retooling them and rewriting them to be delivered not only in an on-demand environment, but also as a software as a service through the cloud. So we're delivering our enterprise applications as software as a service through Oracle Public Cloud. It is not a direct and easy route to take those applications and just all of a sudden cloudify them to make them available via SaaS. So there's a lot of considerations and around security that have to be understood. There's a lot of decisions and information around how you originally wrote that application. And with a lot of the operators, if the application is written down into the network layer, it becomes very tough and rigid through which they're able to migrate any applications. And we have that same point from an enterprise point of view. So we've taken in those considerations to retool from a security, from how the application is written, and into the self-service mode of that application too, and creating that strong self-service mode. Many of them don't have the types of user interfaces that were conducive to today's modern technology. So we've put a lot of effort in rewriting and developing those so that they can be spun up on virtual machines. You can have take advantage of infrastructure as a service and the underlying components as well. So it is not it's on a per application basis. Some are much easier than others, and that's really what we've seen. I don't know if anybody else wants to comment.
Thank you, Brian. So our next question is RCS and voice over LTE in FMC ecosystem on top of IMS and LTE infrastructure in the horizon of being as service in cloud and virtualization?
That's a lot of acronyms. I like that question. That's a very good question. The reason that I think it's interesting is today IMS is looking more and more like a cloud application by virtue of the fact that in LTE, the equivalency for figuring out whether a call, if we start simply with voice, is going to be packetized or switched, well, you know, IMS is going to be that infrastructure, that protocol in order to do that. And as networks are rolling LTE out now, and as that's kind of the agreed upon standard to switch between PSTN and the kind of packetized internet as we know it, there's a number of providers who are actually deploying these types of services designed to be multi-tenant. And we're seeing this because we actually operate, Equinix operates GPRS roaming exchanges for the GSMA today in Singapore and in Washington, D.C. So you can imagine as a progression into things like IMS as well as IPX, the progression of GRX to IPX, IMS as a service sitting in between multiple different packetized operators, as well as multiple different switch-based operators kind of living in the PSTN. These cloud-based services sit as a great opportunity to be poised in the middle of that and make those decisions about how a call gets routed. Taking that to the next level and looking at more rich communications types, IMS is a component of using SIP to establish various types of communications, video, multimedia, and on through. Many of those technologies won't, from day one, be developed in-house by operators. Some will take that on, certainly. Others will rely on third-party service enablers to do that. So there is a segment in the marketplace specifically designed to enable that type of service. It happens in the service enabler realm, kind of as I had mentioned before, some of the people involved in messaging and roaming by virtue of the GRX. It's happening at the OEM and hardware manufacturer level. If you look at some of the major manufacturers of hardware who also operate services on behalf of their large operator customers, that is definitely one service layer they're interested in hosting for their customers. And that looks like a cloud service because ultimately it does become multi-tenant. You can build infrastructure and service multiple customers off of that same infrastructure. So the idea of getting the most value per deployment is predicated on connecting that service with as many operators as possible. So from the Equinix point of view, we definitely see this as a separate subsegment, and it is growing commensurately as LTE is getting deployed globally.
Roberta, let me add a comment about voice over LTE, because I'll leave Eric's comments aside for a minute and hit this aspect of voice over LTE and FMC and any alphabet soup acronym we can come up with right now. But I'll make a couple thoughts about that because I think it's interesting to think about. I would say voice over LTE is just another application that obviously is focused on voice communication. But I think what's interesting to me is voice over LTE is going to allow a different type of voice communication. So I can foresee, that the voice service on a mobile phone is going to be radically changed in the future, and yes, it will be based on voice over LTE eventually. Now, can that voice be enhanced to do different things and probably cover what we used to know as FMC? Yes, I think it will be doing FMC and much more than FMC as we know it today, once it is completely implemented and available on a more scalable deployment. When voice over LTE is going to happen is probably a matter of multiple discussions and arguments that it's going to take still, unfortunately, a couple of years for voice over LTE to happen. I liken it very much to the voice over IP world, where basically technically it was possible years ago. And what you saw was kind of a division or a bifurcation of incumbent versus challenger. And the challengers of voice over IP were the providers and hosting companies and ISPs that could support a quality connection were very easily doing voice over IP in many methods and fashions as possible and didn't have to worry about an existing base of business or revenue like the incumbents do. So you will see voice over LTE from many over-the-top providers. You'll see it from many challengers within the country or region, and they'll provide it without a problem. And in most cases, it should work fine. But some of the early days of the implementation, there may be some quality issues. The incumbents, on the other hand, the owners of the mobile networks, will see voice over LTE as both a cost savings and also a threat to their existing voice revenue. So they're going to slow down, I think, the traditional move to the new technology until they understand how to mitigate the revenue loss. And so you will see some incumbents, let's say the large U.S. carriers, operators, fully support LTE and voice over LTE outside their home region and slow down the implementation of it in their region. And I think it's a phenomenon you'll see because it has to do with both the cost savings aspect of it as well as not making sure the revenue that they have today on voice doesn't go away too fast. But it will happen. I'll stop there and just say it will happen over time, but it's going to take some time. Roberta,
Thank you, Mike.
If I can just add to that, because I think it's a pretty astute observation around VoLTE, and I really think it is more about the age-old thing of taking an existing service and creating a cheaper model and a more efficient model through which you deliver it. And the focus needs to switch a little bit more into how do I transform that from just plain old voice into a new customer experience. And this is where we start to see new technologies like WebRTC and HTML5 start to come into play and start to challenge some of the incumbent ways. So we really feel that the CSPs need to take a new look at what they're delivering as well as how they're delivering it, and be very cautious of some other competitors that aren't coming in to replicate voice, but coming in and offering voice along with new innovative services that can leapfrog it. And I'll kind of leave it at that. And there's a lot of technologies that become very critical in making that happen. And this is an area of strong concern as well as opportunity for the operators.
Thank you, Brian. So another question I have here is how mobile virtualization and cloud computer are interlinked? Mike, do you want to take this one?
I'll take a shot at it and let kind of Brian take a shot at this. I think what you're asking about is this idea of cloud computing, virtualization, and mobile virtualization. And I think we touched upon it earlier in one of the responses about what's happening. I think Eric actually kind of went through this a little bit. But I'll just quickly just make a comment that the idea of cloud computing on a mobile, access to mobile devices, and then resources that are part of the services are basically, they're interlinked, or let's say they're linked together in the sense that, you know, we have talked about during this whole call about the number of different devices accessing a mobile network, and then trying to get applications and services, which today are moving more and more towards a virtualized cloud environment. So they're not the same, but they are linked together in the sense that the demand is driving the need for these resources to be available on a more pay-as-you-go method and a more open approach method. And so in that sense, they are driving the two together to provide, A, more mobile applications that are now moving towards a cloud platform, and allowing multiple devices from multiple locations on a real-time basis. I know Brian's going to add to that. It's kind of a high-level question, really.
And just expanding on that from a little different direction, too, is kind of back to my point of what are operators doing internally. So cloud computing and virtualization of the hardware and data center environments, and then leveraging an SDP on top of that. So your service delivery platform can be leveraging infrastructure as a service, and then mobilizing, right, so some of those applications and revolutionizing how you start to develop and deliver those new services. So it can take advantage of the underlying infrastructure, more efficient and effective. Another aspect is you can actually start to expose your network, things like location, messaging, diameter from a billing perspective, and allow those to be exposed to create a network as a service. And those exposed elements can be consumed by application providers and incorporate those into their own software as a service. So now you've increased your mobilization and virtualized mobile environment out into your handsets and devices and other applications. So that's another way that operators are trying to leverage cloud internally to then create a new and experience externally for their customers.
And this is Eric. We see evidence today on the wireline side of the exact retooling that Brian is talking about. VDI as a service, for example, wireline operators partnering with service enablers on the VDI side of the business and then in turn taking that service offering and bringing it back to their enterprise and Fortune 500 user base. This is happening on the CLEC, the BLEC side, and on the carrier side. So I think it's a fair conclusion to say that the wireless operators could also benefit from that. And in some cases, the wireless operators will be working with their parent network or parent corporation who's engaged in that service offering to extend it out into the wireless service offering.
It becomes an MVNO play.
Thank you, Eric. And so I'd like to thank Brian, Eric, and Mike for joining us on Mobile Cloud today's editorial webinar. And I'd like to thank all attendees. And remember that you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube. This presentation will be available for download from tomorrow, and you can also reach us through Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and my personal email is rprescott@rcrwireless.com. So thank you a lot for this webinar. And it was a pleasure to have you, everybody, on board today. So I would like to thank you again, and bye-bye.
The organizer has ended the session, and this call will be disconnected. Goodbye.